Hello everyone, my name is Brendan Snyder. Thank you so much for joining me and welcome to a brand new series here that I'm starting called If You Like. So this is a series where I'm going to present a major band that we all know and love. In this case, Motley Crue. That's what we're going to do for the first one here. And then I'm going to present 5 bands that I think are filled with the same energy that in this case Motley Crue has, mixing things in like metal, hard rock, punk. It's full of attitude, stuff like that. And so before we dive into these 5 bands that I think exhibit what Motley Crue is all about, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please click the button. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, by subscribing, you'll be able to stay up to date on all that's going on in the world of music, just like this with a brand new series called If You Like. And in this case, we are talking about Motley Crue. So Motley Crue began back in 1981. They just celebrated their 40th anniversary. It's hard to believe these guys have been around that long. Certainly starting to make me feel old because I followed them nearly their entire career. But, you know, they're one of the undisputed kings of 80s hard rock and glam metal. Whether you like that term or not, they were certainly part of that. And their music is filled with unique vocals, dirty, sleazy guitar, punk spirit, lots of attitude, and just an underlying sense of danger. I think these 5 bands that I'm about ready to present to you have much of that same character in them, at least in my opinion. And so without further ado, we'll kick it off with the first band, in this case, Wildside. Under the Influence 1992 album, debut studio album, back out on Bad Reputation Records if you want to pick it up. It's got a nice reissue sounding really good. So this band formed back in 1988 originally as Young Guns. But there was a movie of the same name being filmed at the time. They got a cease and desist order, so they had to change their name. That's how they became Wildside. And so the band was produced by legendary Led Zeppelin producer Andy Johns, which sort of tells you the quality that this album is, and at least what the label thought they could do. In my opinion, it's one of the best glam metal albums of all time. Opening track on this, Hang On Lucy, is a classic, sleazy, dirty, guitar-driven song, which is just one of the best glam metal tracks out there. Check this out. If that one doesn't sell you, nothing on this album is going to. But a little side note here, guitar player for the band, Brent Woods, would go on and join Vince Neil's solo band. Then he would record Carved in Stone album in 1995. Now, while the Carved in Stone album is nothing like Vince Neil's debut album that you can see behind me there, Exposed, which I personally think is a long-lost Motley Crue album. It is so good in the classic vein of Motley Crue. Very different than what Motley Crue continued on with the self-titled album with John Corabi, which of course I love. But this little connection here to Motley Crue in and of itself just shows you even what Vince Neil thought of this guy in terms of his guitar playing style and so forth. Now, vocalist of the band, Drew Hanna, would continue on and record a follow-up album. But unfortunately, you know, what a lot of the bands were doing of that day and era, they were modernizing, they were changing their sound. You know, this was 1992 and after, so grunge had already broken, and unfortunately the new album didn't do much of anything, and the band would break up at that point. So if you're interested in this one though, which is classic sounding 80s hard rock, check out the debut one here. All right, next one up is War Baby's self-titled 1992, another album that just went under the radar. Debut studio album by these guys, also formed in 1988. This one by former TKO vocalist Brad Sensel, who is an amazing vocalist. Really, really unique vocals, worth, you know, more, you know, representation than he gets or recognition than he gets. If you don't know who TKO is, they're also worth checking out, but they're more in the punk rock vein than of the hard rock sort of glam sound that this album is here. Also of note though is the drummer of the band, Richard Stuurved. And again, I apologize if I'm saying any of these names wrong here. I do my best with what I've got. But he was a member of the Fastbacks, which was a Seattle punk band, and also Three Fish, which is Pearl Jam bassist Jeff Met's side project. Debut single Hang Me Up on here was co-written by Paul Stanley of Kiss, so that also just kind of tells you the quality of what was expected or what was thought of on this album here. It's full of big vocals, amazing guitar, fantastic production, but unfortunately it was 1992. The album didn't make much of an impression and sank without a trace, and they broke up, but we are left with this one really amazing album here. I've always wished some more stuff would be found and released, or a follow-up would happen, but until then, we've just got this one great album. Okay, next one up, Slazby, Screwed, Blued, and Tattooed, 1990. Another great album. Second studio album from these guys, and it was the first one with their new vocalist, Andrew Elt. Debut album was recorded with a different singer. So the album itself was originally recorded in 1988 in the Netherlands, their homeland, but it didn't get international distribution until 1990 in the US, 2 years after being recorded. Perfect time for it still at that time, but we will see how it has some ramifications a little later on. So the album has really big production on here. It's a huge step forward from their 1987 debut album. Big guitars, soaring vocals on this, and I think it just totally elevated this band above the pack and whatever else was going on at the time. 3 really big radio hits came off of this. They were played all the time on the radio station, you know, where I was from. I was growing up in Florida, so I heard these a lot. Screwed, Blued, and Tattooed, the title track, Stranger Than Paradise, and Heroes Die Young. Check out these 3 tracks if you're not familiar with the band. You may well know some of these. So the band did record a follow-up called Power Tool in 1992, but it had a similar story to the album we were just talking about there, because this album was finished in 1990, but the album Screwed, Blued, and Tattooed had just gotten released in the US. It was starting to have some legs of its own, and so they held this one back 2 years, and unfortunately it essentially killed the momentum that this album could have had the band released each of their albums, the one in 88 and in 1990. Then they would have had 2 big albums during the classic era of this type of music. Unfortunately, it kind of pushed things off and killed their momentum. All right, next one to talk about here, Spread Eagle, self-titled 1990 release. This one here, if you only check out one album today, check this one out. Debut studio album from them, one of the dirtiest, sleaziest rock records ever. Hands down, in my opinion, this thing is just top notch. And guitarist Paul DiBartolo, he just provided some amazing guitar riffs, lead work on this thing, while vocalist Ray West provided all the swagger and attitude you can imagine or would want for this thing. I think this has some of the most distinctive, sleaziest vocals in all of the glam metal era. That's why I say this album here, bar none, is the top. It is so good. And again, they had a lot of radio hits on it. I don't know how much of this stuff transcribed over into MTV and that sort of stuff with videos and so forth. But in terms of the radio, I was hearing these things. That's how I knew these bands. Broken City, Switchblade Serenade, Through These Eyes, again, 3 really big tracks. Check them out. You might know one of these songs, even if you're not recognizing the name of the band right now. And so the band would go on and release a second album called Open to the Public in 1993. So another album that came out a little too late, but continued much of the same vein that the first album was doing. It just didn't quite scale the heights that the first album had. And the band would reunite in 2006, but they wouldn't release a new album until 2019 called Subway to the Stars. But unfortunately, while that album itself is good in its own right, it just has almost nothing, and it is a far cry from that debut album. Different style of music, different vocals from Ray West. He's not singing in that dirty, sleazy style. Good album, worth checking out, but just know that it's different than that debut. Check out the debut. All right, and so the final album to talk about here, probably the one that is the most under the radar of all of these, Rockhead's self-titled 1992 album. This one here, debut studio album, formed by famous producer Bob Rock in 1991. Of course, the producer that worked with Motley Crue on Dr. Feelgood, Metallica on their Black album, Bon Jovi, just to name a few there. Bob Rock had other bands, Payolas and Rock and Hide, but they were more popular in his native Canada than here in the US. They were also a different style. They were much more pop rock and so forth than the hard rock stylings of this. This one here right in line with Motley Crue, Bon Jovi style hard rock. Bob played guitar for the band, but there was an unknown vocalist that did an outstanding job. His name, Steve Jack. Wish he had done more. Such good vocals on this album. But you can imagine with a name like Bob Rock that he must have been able to get some really amazing guest players that he certainly did. So we've got members of Bon Jovi, The Cult, Little Caesar all turning up on here doing co-writes, performing, etc. So there's all that added bonus, making this album a little more special than just an album featuring Bob Rock on it. Also shows you the quality of it because he's got these other guys stepping in on here to play. And the band would go out on the road with Bon Jovi to promote this in 1993, but unfortunately, you know, due to the time that it was, touring with Bon Jovi was not enough and the album faded without a trace. Bob would then return to his production duties and, you know, nothing to worry about there because he certainly had more success doing that. There you go. 5 bands you can check out if you like Motley Crue. I'm going to leave a link to some related videos in the description that you can check out if you want, in particular, a Motley Crue album ranking, since we are all here talking about our love of Motley Crue, but also the top 5 glam metal albums of 1989, of which Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood is one of those. So enjoy those 2 videos if you're interested, and certainly consider sharing this video out on social media. Help spread the word that way. All right, hope you enjoyed this inaugural edition of If You Like, and then followed by 5 bands that are similar in vein to that band we are talking about, in this case, Motley Crue. Let me know your thoughts on this. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you all real soon. Bye-bye, everyone.